This forest was nothing if not persistent. In fact, it seemed to have got to her neck whilst she rested on Celine. The poor thing was covered in roots and mud and something else. Something which stood out stark white amidst the dark roots and grey mist. She drew closer, the chill mist parting before her. There were teeth amidst the roots, thousands of them polished to a pearlescent gleam. Some had even buried themselves into the steel plates. She ordered the beast stand, and though it took some effort, it broke free of the forest grasp. Yet some roots remained, wedged in an access panel. She climbed a maintenance ladder and slammed the release, allowing a wave of singed plant matter and blackened teeth to pour out. The reactors had clearly been running hot despite the beast's entanglement. Yet what she found within was unexpected. The original reactors were overgrown and no longer glowed blue as they should. In fact, they didn't glow at all despite still outputting energy. She could feel their hunger in the air, a tension she must not break. Flashes of two great black hounds filled her mind, staring her down from between the trees. To break the stare would be permission to pounce. She let her glow pour forth, filling the crawl space and her mind. It fills the space between the countless cables and stretches between the pines. The dogs step forward to meet it. They growl and cackle, splitting matter and devouring fog. A cable tears free and falls from the hound, showering the forest floor around her in sparks. She does not break the hound's stare. Her glow recedes and the dogs prowl closer, baring their fangs and stinking of ozone. There are fangs all around her now, within the trees, within the soil, within the wires, within the mouths of the two dogs which are inches from her throat. And then her apocalyptic light poured forth. It stained the trees red and drowned the dogs like a great tide. It drowned the whole forest. Pine needles and teeth floating in the current. In the distance, she saw something like a man, undisturbed by the light. Their eyes met. This was his forest, yet it turned against him now. He knew of her liege and her moon, and of the dark ocean which filled her veins. The reactor slowed, and she closed the panel. Her courtier began to wander towards the willow, and she had a courtier dispatched to contact Silex. It seemed his power was intact, and he would be useful to her quest. We found her, standing in the open clearing. Last evening, she had slipped away from our campsite unnoticed. Throughout the night, we had been looking for any traces of her. But vigils are disturbingly dedicated not to leave footsteps when they walk. It took no less than 6 hours to trace her with the help of Stargazer. When we got to her, we were already too late. 4 spectral hands retreated into the soil beneath her feet, leaving only silky strands of mist behind. Framed between the arched trees, she looked viciously radiant. We called out to her a few times before she responded. "Sirocco?" She turned towards us in a single fluid motion. Her silhouette was barely recognizable in the strange shadows cast by the overhanging branches. Light danced around her face with sparks of violet electricity. A singular eye glowed in its socket. What stood before us was no longer human. Her face was transformed into a mass of tangled roots, her skin covered in similar structures of wicker and moss. Her head had sprouted a crown of thorny vines and spiked branches, swaying with the wind. A voice emanated from the entity, whistling and creaking like the forest itself.
Sirocco is not here anymore, though what you hear is indeed her voice speaking to you.
Explain yourself immediately!
Our guns were raised at the entity as they began to laugh. It sounded hollow and freakish, but somehow sincerely delighted.
I have sought the gifts of the Sisters Simulacrum, and they have granted me immense power. I have ascended beyond death.
It paused, with arms wide open and a smile on its imitation of a face, as if to greet us.
The body of Sirocco is in its very own plane of existence now, planted deep within the soil of the Grand Nexus, safeguarded from any harm the occupiers of this forest may bring. This form is only a simulacrum, an avatar of my mind and voice. Should it expire, another will grow. I am become endless. I am become Fangmoor. How can we trust who you say you are?
The simulacrum creaked and shook in an uncanny imitation of a chuckle.
You never trusted me to begin with, Captain. You choose to make it an issue now? Besides, I do not need your trust. I will act on my own. But do not fret. I mean still to aid you. Yeah, no doubt about it. That's the Sirocco I know.
Lysaith turned his head towards the trees of the Fangmoor, before again locking eyes with the simulacrum. My Lord Vigilant, what are the trees in this place? Sirocco remained silent for a few seconds, contemplating her best hypothesis.
I have gathered from the sisters that the flora of this realm are impressions of other worlds, minds, and ideas. For what reason or purpose, I know not.
There was silence. Deafening silence. I can only imagine all contemplated our next steps on this expedition. Both looked back at me, awaiting my orders.
For now, let's work with what we have. Hostile forces yet surround us. I reckon having a reincarnating vigil on our side will prove quite useful. Perhaps we should visit that willow again, eh? Then we'll see what our friend Silex's role is in all this. Let's get moving. The fog has been following us.
So, this place, it is a prison? Asked Norio, trying to understand what he was being told properly. Silex hadn't lied when he said that there was much to discuss. And their discussion had kept them entertained during their trip back and helped to stave off any bad feelings that previous revelations had brought. Currently, yes, but not by design. It is more akin to a natural vault, replied Silex. Happy for the company, happier to not be carried like an oversized water bladder. We can discuss the nitty-gritty when we reach somewhere safer. Norio didn't understand a couple of the words, but he got the general idea behind them. The path they walked was one they had trodden well, having not long traveled it before. Still, it was also one of the few places they knew they'd be safe in this place. If the willow was as strong as it and Silex proclaimed, then they couldn't afford to take risks. Not yet, at least. treading the now familiar paths. They knew that they would reach the clearing and the seemingly persistent defenses therein. Still, something was different. A confusing blend of summer's bloom and wet rot. Past the trees, they could see two figures, human in height and feminine in appearance. They didn't look like anyone from their first steps into the palace, but that didn't mean that they could be trusted, especially given their recent change of plans. Norio brought the group to a stop before the clearing, drew his wakizashi, and signaled Kaeda to follow him. No sooner was he a few steps into the opening did he feel a jerk by his side. Something had struck his sword, shearing the blade off and sending it flying towards the edge of the clearing.
"You are brave to draw a blade in our presence, warrior,"
said one of the figures, her words melodic on Norio's ears.
"But foolish to think you would change anything,"
said the other with a growl. The first glanced at the other before returning its gaze to them.
"Worry not. We mean you no harm. Even you,"
she finished with chilled words, turning her attention to the forest. The others entered the opening, the sisters' faces souring at the sight of Silex.
"Sisters, forgive my companions," began Silex. "Their time here has been taxing upon their spirits. But know that if they truly meant any harm, then I would not be here to greet you."
Norio turned to him, eyebrow raised.
"Ah, where are my manners? Sisters, I present to you Norio, Goruso, Jorishi, Kaeda, and Naoki, the champions of the Toyori Shogun," he continued, pointing them out. "Companions, these are the sisters, envoys of this very forest." "Oh, my apologies. It seems we've been unjustly rude," said the first with a warm smile. "Why are you here?" barked the other.
Norio stepped forward. "That tree, that thing at the center of this place, it has wronged us, and we will not let that stand." He paused, weighing his options. "If you are truly connected to this place, your aid would be greatly appreciated. Will you join us?"
The two sisters turned to each other, concern evident upon their faces. After a moment, the other sister spoke. "We will not help you raise arms against the Willow," she said with a scowl, her words being met with a mixture of anger and disappointment. "Not that we don't want to," blurted the first, flustered. "It's simply that we are not in a position to do so. But that doesn't mean we're powerless to act." The first leaned into the other, and after a brief whispered discussion, a faint glow emanated from the pair, coupled with the sound of strained wood. Once they were finished, the other spoke. "There, we have done what we can. Now leave!" Norio turned to Silex, unsure of what to do in this situation. He simply shrugged. "I guess that's all then. Let us leave," he said, turning to leave, followed by the others. The first began to wave them off, but paused, a thought passing through her head. The blade that they had broken earlier raced to her hand. She placed a hand to the broken end, roots sprouting from her palm and wrapping around it. Drawing her hand away, a shaft grew out of it, growing larger than the first herself. With the sound of footsteps behind them, the group stopped to find the first, an austere Naginata far too big for her to wield in hand. "My apologies for earlier. I only hope that this will make up for it," she said, presenting the gift to Norio. He turned the weapon over in his hand. The shaft was rough, and the whole thing was top-heavy, but it was serviceable, and that was enough. "I hope you will use it well." The Ogroni bowed and turned to leave.
the first seeing them off with a forced smile.
I fear you will have to.
The king looked upon his new sword, satisfied with the results. The light from torches illuminated the handcrafted scabbard and blade, which was the culmination of a testy encounter, one which he hoped would not happen again for the sake of his own patience and sanity. But he couldn't help but wonder, just who else had been brought to this forest? And a small part of him couldn't help but wonder, why would God call upon so many different parties to fulfill this singular task? Was it even him? Had they been deceived? He quickly quashed these thoughts. They were unbecoming of a king, and would set a poor example for the troops. So he placed his new sword at his side, and made his way to the southern wall, unaware of the encounter waiting for him. Upon his arrival, he became confused at the sight of soldiers scrambling to the wall, muskets ready and aimed at something beyond. Heading up there to get a good look, he could see a small party of what appeared to be humans in the most outlandish outfits he had ever seen. A shocking assortment of reds, greens, and whites, which both complemented and clashed with each other. They each carried some strange variant of musket, but none of them were in a position of fire, a good indicator that they possessed no hostile intentions. One of them stepped forward. Based on his appearance, the king assumed he was the leader, and so he decided to initiate contact. "What is your business here?" The party leader, who Charles could see had sharp-pointed ears unlike humans, spoke in a higher-pitched voice.
I am known as Buddy, and these are my militiamen. We are part of a wider force known as the Christmas Elf Militia.
This last part raised a few eyebrows and piqued the king's interest. While these elves, as they were apparently called, were a strange sight they had never encountered before outside of old pagan myths, the Swedes were certainly familiar with Christmas. Perhaps the two sides could find common ground.
We had intended to set up camp here, unaware that you had already established a presence. But perhaps you would be willing to let us stay for the night. It would give us time to rest, resupply, and be ready to travel by morning.
King Charles considered it for a few moments, before ordering his men to lower their weapons, for he saw no harm in humoring this request. And still slightly annoyed after the encounter with the green-armored harlot, this might serve to lift his spirits. The warband was so small now, and so very tired. Physical exertion wasn't the problem. Though the warband was down to 3 knights, Golta included, they still possessed a small number of bog bodies to tirelessly carry and service their equipment as they pushed on. It was the betrayal that had left them so numb. Morgan had been Golta's advisor for many years. Privately, she considered him something like a father. They all did. For Morgan to abandon the Undermire and answer the call of this new power, this oblivion, as he called it, was unthinkable. It was this place, tethering them with corruptive bonds, infecting their minds. Golta swore, as she had done constantly since the day before, that she would see the Fangmoor lie in ruin. Morgan and Harold swirled through the trees. Their mortal bodies were gone. They were things of fog and shadow now. Having ascended, the secrets of the Fangmoor were bare to the 2 fog heralds. They could feel the motes of godhood that stirred in each tree. They could feel the creeping shadows that were drawn to this divine place, slowly infecting every root and branch. More than anything, they could feel the hunger of the oblivion between the rifts, the glorious force of uncreation that yearned to feed on this forest of gods. The fog heralds descended on the camp, their ethereal forms coalescing into bodies that were a bit more compatible with the mortals that wandered the Fangmoor. Before them, a band of elves sat around their fires, eyes peering into the quiet night as they brewed their cocoa and managed their gear. The fog herald stepped out of the darkness, ready to make their offer.